So let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
The 911 call center started receiving multiple 911 calls for an active shooter inside of 345 Park Avenue at 52nd Street in Manhattan. We have 5 victims shot, our officer and 4 other innocent civilians, plus the shooter.
Yup, horrific shooting in New York City. We watched it here yesterday. 345 Park Avenue was the target, home to some of the most powerful companies in the world, including the NFL. 6 shots, 5 dead, including an officer with 2 young kids and a baby on the way. We follow this investigation.
Number 2.
But we're going to be getting some good, strong food. We can save a lot of people. I mean, some of those kids that's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that.
Although some of it was faked, coming to a head, Hamas refuses to negotiate or give up the hostages in a crisis situation for the people they rule over in Gaza as the world tries to work on the folly, which is a 2-state solution, and Trump pushes Bibi to act.
Number 1.
I would have thought, and I got to own it, that that these tariffs were going to sink this economy by this time, and they didn't.
They didn't, Bill Maher, and you're right. Trump shocking the world, his critics, and perhaps even his allies with massive trade deals that make America stronger. Next up, I think China, India, Mexico, and Canada, if they are smart. But, of course, Gaza has gotten the world's attention. Why? Because that's what Hamas wants. By refusing to legitimately negotiate, by allowing all the higher-ups to be killed and the ones remaining to keep on fighting wherever they're hiding, which are in tunnels. They don't ever go at you directly. There's a lot of food that cannot get into Gaza, and people are no question suffering, but Hamas making it worse, and they're thoroughly responsible. And Donald Trump saying, hey, Israel, step up, cut 17.
Israel has a lot of responsibility. They're hampered by the fact that you still have 20 hostages or so. And the people of Israel are very concerned about the 20 hostages. It's very interesting. You could say they could be more concerned about retribution than the 20 hostages, but they really want the 20 hostages to survive and live to make it.
Retribution's already happened. It's a matter of these guys getting out or dying or giving up. Eli Lake joins us now, columnist for the Free Press, contributing editor at Commentary. Eli, the president's pressuring Bibi now to act, and they're going to try different ways to get food in there, and these people are suffering. But we should also always remember who's responsible.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, Hamas is responsible. They started the war. Hamas is responsible for the civilian casualties because they created an entire military infrastructure honeycombed and underneath the civilian infrastructure of Gaza, and they have hoarded food and sold it at very high prices on the markets. So they are kind of partners with the main UN, known as UNRWA, the United Nations Works and Relief Agency, that was created just to deal with the Palestinian refugees. And Hamas has infiltrated it and basically, for all intents and purposes, taken it over. That said, I think that Israel made a blunder when they announced that they're completely shutting off the border after Hamas violated the ceasefire a couple months ago. And this was, I think, a sop to the more right-wing elements of the government, Benazir Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir mainly. And I think that in some ways kind of unfairly led to Israel being blamed, because what they were really doing was coming up with an alternative through this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which I think is a good idea. I don't think we know most of the story as to how there have been so many of these incidents where live fire is fired into crowds of people who are coming to get food. But it was a mistake to sort of, in a show, to sort of say we're going to close the border to all these other things and try to put pressure on Hamas. It's not going to work with a group like Hamas. Dead Palestinians, dead Gazans are the goal of Hamas. That is what they want. They're fighting an information war as well as a real war. So at this point, I don't think that the president is really putting tons of pressure on Netanyahu. I think some people are reading too much into that. But the Israelis are now going to airdrop food. They're going to try to flood Gaza with food. And hopefully we're going to stave off an effective military or political presence in Gaza, full stop. Because if they are, then you're going to get another war.
Yep.
If they are, Palestinians are going to continue to suffer. So if you are the humanitarian at this point, you have to figure out, how do you pressure Hamas? Now, there's one thing that hasn't been tried, and that is either directly targeting Hamas leaders abroad in other countries. I'm mainly thinking of Qatar, but there's some in Turkey, or putting the screws to the Qataris, who I think are kind of like the funders at this point, or the diplomatic, parents of Hamas, or at least they're their advocates, and explain to them that if you don't, kick out the Hamas leaders in Doha, then we're going to start seriously considering taking our military base out of Qatar, or something like that. So they got to play hardball with the Qataris.
But Eli, we keep hearing that Israel is not upset that the leadership is in Qatar because they know where they are. They have to deal with them at some point. So I don't even think that Netanyahu wants them out of Qatar, because at one point, if they're not going to do a deal with them, I mean, they can assassinate them in Iran. But I think that for a long time, the Qataris said that the Israelis were communicating with them there about Hamas. So I'm interested.
I think that's a little disingenuous, because the Qataris have enormous amounts of leverage over Hamas. The idea isn't necessarily to kick them out. That's not like the end goal. The end goal is to put enough pressure on the Hamas leadership that is living in luxury, that they will then at least use their influence on the ground in Gaza to get to an end to the conflict. And that's the card that hasn't been played. The Qataris act as if they are intermediaries. They're not intermediaries. The Qataris are in part responsible for Hamas. Now, there was a deal. It was a devil's bargain before October 7th, where Netanyahu allowed the Qataris to fund Hamas because somebody had to fund infrastructure in Gaza.
Right.
And his view was it was better to have them there, being funded by Hamas, and then, potentially having another one of these kind of humanitarian crises. I think the wisdom of that has been exposed. I think that was a foolish kind of short-term thinking. But nonetheless, that's what it was before. But now we have to acknowledge that Hamas and Qatar have this relationship that we haven't allowed ourselves to fully see. Hamas is very much indebted, especially now that they're so much weaker in Gaza, to Qatar. So Qatar needs to put leverage on Hamas or face the consequences in their relationship with the United States. That's how I see it.
So they're looking now, this big push, which is just folly, of a two-state solution. First France and now the Starmer over in the UK. Listen to the UN General Secretary, cut 24.
Let's tell it straight. For decades, Middle East diplomacy has been far more process than peace. Words, speeches, declarations may not have much meaning to those on the ground. They have seen it before. They have heard it before. We know the central question for Middle East peace is implementation of the two-state solution, where two independent, sovereign, democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace and security.
And that's what they're going to be doing at the UN. What a great idea. Two-state solution. It really went well in 93 with Oslo. Remember, they were going to have the land bridge from Gaza to the West Bank. And look what they did with that. So why are we even thinking about it? You know who doesn't want a two-state solution? Hamas. The Palestinians don't want a two-state solution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, everything you just said is correct. The problem is that what you end up doing is, if you get a two-state solution now, which won't happen for the reasons you just said, but it looks like a reward for October 7th, and you don't want to create that impression. What you want is but here we are. The UN has been terrible about this from the beginning, when there was evidence that there were UN employees, I think something like 24, who participated on October 7th, many more who supported it in these text checks. That was a scandal that was exposed almost 2 years ago, right after October 7th, and the months after it by Hillel Neuer's group, UN Watch. The UN, they went into dissembling mode. They treated it as a political spin kind of thing, and they tried to deny it. They acknowledged what they had to acknowledge, this guy Guterres, I mean, the UN Secretary General has zero credibility in my view, and it's just completely wrong. If you want a two-state solution, you have to get behind destroying Hamas. And if you want a two-state solution, frankly, you also have to understand that you're not going to get one with the current geriatric leadership of the Palestinian Authority. You have to, it's a much harder kind of problem than, he's acknowledging at this point. So I'm with you. I think it's a joke. And I would point out the difference in Oslo is that at that point, you at least had Arafat telling Western audiences, if not his own, Palestinians, he has reformed. He was no longer seeking to destroy Israel. He was no longer endorsing terrorism. He was cooperating with the United States, and the CIA played a major role in that and trying to round up the extremist elements. So there was a lot of stuff that Arafat had done to get to that point where we were so optimistic about peace. It obviously didn't end up working after 2000. He couldn't come up with a counteroffer in the final Camp David talks, or for that matter, in the Taba talks after Clinton's presidency. So in that respect, what we have here is, a bunch of wish casting really from the UN, and it's dangerous because if this is seen as the path to peace or path to statehood, then it creates the incentive for more October 7th. It creates the incentive, frankly, for more war. So, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we're granting these are good intentions.
I know, but it's dumb. I mean, like France meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, that disgraced criminal who takes the millions of dollars of aid and makes himself a billionaire and sits there in exile in West Bank commanding 4 people. It's crazy. By the way, Eli Lake, our guest, if you're watching on Zoom, you understand that. But if you're listening on the radio, just see if you recognize the voice. Real quick, you wrote about this, and it's going to become a much bigger story. The whole Russia hoax leading up to 2016. And if you have to really take a second to understand what is new about this. What is new about this is that Hillary Clinton is as dirty as you can be in all this. And it seems like Obama's intelligence team picked up that she was doing it. And the Russians picked up that they're about to be blamed for colluding with Donald Trump erroneously to circumvent an election because they did hack her emails. And they did try to do stuff with social media, but they never infiltrated our election, and they certainly didn't do what Hillary Clinton's team said they did.
Steele dossier, yeah. Well, listen, I'm not. As you know, I've been writing about Russiagate for a long time, and I took the slings and arrows from many of my colleagues in the mainstream media when I was really pointing out what a scam and a scandal it was. That said, I do think that the latest documents that were released last week, the declassified version of the House Intelligence Committee report from the end of 2017, early 2018, is valuable because it shows just how much John Brennan, the director of CIA, was in disagreement with his top handpicked analysts to put this intelligence community assessment together. That said, the fundamental thing in that intelligence community assessment, it did not say that Trump colluded with Russia. What it said was that Russia had developed over time a preference for Donald Trump in the election. I think it's fair to point out that there was intelligence that didn't totally support that. But on the other hand, if you look at it, we agree on the facts that the Russians did hack Hillary. And we agree on the fact that they leaked it in the middle of the campaign. Well, that did benefit the Trump campaign, unless you want to argue either that the Russians didn't hack, which some have said, but all the documents actually confirm that that was a legitimate conclusion from the intelligence community. Or you want to argue that the release of these embarrassing emails from the campaign, particularly I'm thinking here about the Goldman Sachs speeches that she wanted to keep hidden, or there was a devastating memo that was released about Clinton Inc. and how he had made $30 million since he was left the presidency in these private speaking gigs for like various kind of shady oligarchs and banks and so forth. If you want to argue that didn't damage her, I believe it did damage her. But if you want to say it didn't damage her, then maybe that was the case. But I don't think that I think focusing on whether or not there was intelligence to support what the Kremlin's preference was is a little bit like evading this larger point, which is that if they were leaking and hacking and leaking one candidate in a binary race, then the the other candidate
But,
was
but
a
Eli, real quick,
beneficiary.
we're up against the break.
Yeah.
This is the issue. When you
Yeah.
go concoct a relationship between Trump and Russia, regardless of the emails, because you don't like that email hack, and nobody would. But because you
Right.
did that and the DNC got exposed, you thought I'll just make up a scandal and I'll let that go right through the Trump first 2.5 years and I'll feed the media these stories. That, I think,
Brian,
is where we're going.
That we agree is a scandal.
Gotcha.
My point
Eli,
is that the new information is not quite that.
Eli Lake, thanks so much. Kevin Roberts joins us now. Kevin, you guys, great to see you.
Yeah.
You guys crunch the numbers. Now, we don't have a lot of details on Vietnam, Philippines, and the UK, now the EU, Japan, Indonesia. But from what you've seen in the framework, what do your economists tell you?
Our economists, who I think happen to be the best in the country, are really excited about the framework they see. They, of course, are waiting to see a couple of categories of details, Brian, and they're right about that. But the most important thing to say is that the progress we're seeing with these deals, even if all we have is frameworks, each one of them gets a little more detailed. For example, the framework with the EU is really detailed. It's very clear that on that one, the United States is going to benefit, particularly American energy companies. That's going to be really important for geopolitics.
But it works for them too, by the way. We're a reliable supplier.
It really does. And we've been telling, as you know, we've talked about this over the years. We've been telling our European friends who ask Heritage to translate what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance mean, because sometimes the Europeans incorrectly assume the president doesn't like Europe. And our answer to them always is, no, the president loves Europe so much, he wants you to pull your own weight. He wants you to pull your own weight economically. He wants you to pull your own weight militarily.
You said that to them, by the way.
I sure have.
Yeah.
And it's so good to see that happening, to your point, to the benefit of Americans and Europeans. But as we get more details, I think when we get through the next economic quarter or two, and our economists are able to see that there isn't runaway inflation as a result of these tariffs, that actually the United States is benefiting from it, we're going to be really celebratory.
And I think that if the other deals don't come in, the president's got a plan, and that came out yesterday too. Cut two.
You said you were going to set essentially a tariff for the rest of the world.
For the world.
What percent will that tariff be?
I would say it'll be somewhere in the 15 to 20% range.
So that's what everyone's going to get, and that's going to push people to do a deal. Don't we hear about this all the time? Whether you're trying to buy a car or trying to buy a house, you're playing cat and mouse, and he says, no, I have a card to play. It's called the American economy. And I said I want to rebalance it. You've met me before. You know I follow through. And I think it's all seems to be working out for him. Well, what is your sense on the tariffs and that converting to a tax? Because traditional conservatives were giving the stiff arm to tariffs.
Yeah, and at Heritage, for example, we don't wake up in the morning and say tariffs are the end-all, be-all, right? But trusting President Trump's motivation, what we have attempted to do from the outside informally is suggest that they take the reciprocal part of the tariff and convert it to what's called a border adjustment tax, which basically is what the Europeans have, where foreign exporters pay that tax, not the American people. That kind of thing, which we've written about for several years, I think may be where this is going, either formally or informally. The benefit of all that is the bottom line, Brian, the president is using tariffs as a tool to correct the lack of free trade by so many of these countries who then are so arrogant to turn around and tell the American people, oh, you're not actually implementing free trade because you're not in this agreement with us. He's really calling them out. And I think if you give this another 3 to 6 months, it's all going to settle out. I was meeting with some business folks in New York yesterday who, like Heritage, don't love the idea of tariffs, but they love the clarity that's coming from these deals.
Right. And I think that, it's interesting. The first time around, they go, we're going to wait this guy out. Clearly, this is not going to work. He comes in. He's such a rookie when it comes to politics. They don't have that approach now. And you saw for the UK Prime Minister yesterday, you must have laughed out loud, as I did. They used a 5-minute press conference. The president sat there. They had a meeting. They said what they had to say. And he sat there for over an hour and 15 minutes. They talked about everything. And you could see Starmer's like, well, our women won the European Union Championship. He had nothing to say after a while. But the president is showing respect for the American people by doing that. He's not really showing it to the press. He's saying, this is what's happening. This is what I'm thinking about. You see him thinking with Vladimir Putin. I thought I could do a deal with this guy. It turns out he was just playing me, and I don't have to wait 50 days. I'm going to wait 10 to 12. You never would have a leader talk that openly and honestly about something that consequential.
He is the most transparent president in American history.
Because that's what he's like one-on-one.
Oh, totally. You know that. I know that from the relationship each of us has with him. And I wish more people would see that. But the interesting thing about his second term, to your point, is that both Americans and people around the world are seeing that side of Trump. He's a very warm, caring person who cares first and foremost, as he should, about the American people. But he wants people around the world to flourish. For example, on the Ukraine-Russia war, you and I both know that the president is very much a pacifist. He hates the notion of innocent lives being lost, as most of us do, obviously. But that's really motivating him to be so frustrated with Putin, whom he thought he had enough of a professional relationship with to be able to settle this conflict. I'm very confident that that 10 to 12-day timeline is real and that we're finally going to see an end to this conflict.
I know. I think it's very real. The thing is, too, he knows that Russia right now is trying to get as much done as possible, I guess, within the 50 days, or he's going to ignore it. But if you look at some of the facts about their economy, I know they're used to absorbing pain and they're not used to a quality life, but their government defense spending is now at 60%. Now they say about their entire economy, inflation is over 10%. They have a sovereign wealth fund of $110 billion. It's down to $30 billion. They can't get airplane parts. They can't get computer chips. China single-handedly is sustaining them with these so-called dual-use products that they're sending over that they're still using for weapons. At one point, he might be evil, but I didn't think Vladimir Putin was crazy. I thought, as Trump probably did, I'm giving him an off-ramp that actually is face-saving. Why do you think, because I know you could surround this thing 180, why do you think he doesn't want that off-ramp?
I think because he's, from his vantage point, Putin's own politics in Russia, he believes he's past the point of no return. And he had an opportunity to take that off-ramp from our point of view in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration. We were predicting that at Heritage for the very reasons that you mentioned. And the most important thing, other than Trump being elected, that was a change in a positive way toward that, was Germans and other European countries cutting off their purchasing of Russian oil and gas, which, by the way, they were doing while they were telling the American taxpayer to support the Ukraine military effort.
Were they doing it through third party, or were they doing it direct?
Directly, and then third party, but that's now over to their benefit. But to your point, the real thing that keeps this going is China. And so where people need to connect the dots is not just with the conversation Trump's having with Putin and Russia, but how this is connected to a potential China trade deal as well. Trump, bottom line, is resetting the geopolitics of the world for the rest of the century, especially if we're able to bring the end to the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
Did you hear anything that came out of the meeting in Stockholm? Because I have not.
Not yet.
So about China, Mike Pillsbury reporting yesterday that he had sources to say that China was going to mention a path to a ceasefire with Russia in that meeting.
I would not be surprised.
So they are in control of that. I mean, as much as they're in control of the fentanyl precursors.
If you listen to the data you read off about Russia's economy, they are in dire straits. And it's hard for anyone of us in the West to understand internally what's going on there. But our great experts at Heritage believe that they're in dire straits. And I think that probably has something to do with the president's aggressive timeline.
Just from what you could tell, will there be any push to have a massive number of confirmation votes before the Senate leaves?
Man, we're working on it. At Heritage Action in particular, which is our advocacy arm, we're arguing that they should stay in session or actually have a real recess so the president can make recess appointments. But the news from Capitol Hill this morning is not very positive.
It isn't. For example, as we switch over to Gaza, we're watching the UN now having meetings about a two-state solution. Is there a bigger waste of time than a two-state solution talk? And Mike Waltz, if he had that job, would be able to hold a press conference to say, there is nobody that wants a two-state solution. The Israelis have given up on it, and the Palestinians don't want it. What are you doing, UK, possibly, and France, saying that, demanding it?
Well, it just shows you how out of step these European leaders are, that they're talking about something that no one believes is possible. We certainly don't believe it's a good idea at all. And so that is an utter waste of time. And it really does underscore that if you had Mike Waltz in that position as UN ambassador, that we would benefit from it, the world would. But also think about the EU trade deal. What if we had our Heritage colleague, Andy Puzder, actually confirmed as the ambassador to the European Union? Not only would that be helpful with the messaging of this, the framework of this deal in America, it would be helpful in Europe.
Oh, there's no question. And he'd be really strong at it too. There are so many people. Also, in talking to Sean Duffy, I said, Sean, it was good that you got in there early. I have no deputy, I have no undersecretary. And now he goes over to NASA, same thing. So I mean, they're really hurting the country. And I'm going to encourage, too, when there's a Democratic president, and there will be, this is not the point. This is not where you should be holding people up. If you are going to vote them, yes, and Waltz is getting through, the only people you're hurting is the country.
You can always count on Democrats in the Senate to change tradition. And the tradition in this country is whichever party wins the presidency, they get to appoint their people and get them confirmed, with rare exceptions if the person is a total goofball. And in this case, these are extraordinarily competent men and women who are there to do the work of the American people. Ultimately, this is going to be a huge political loser for the Democrats.
All right, I got to ask you, this is something we were asking up before we hopped on the air. A former member of Heritage is going to be running against primarying Senator Lindsey Graham, who is now in the president's good graces. They fight famously, but tell me about this matchup and who do you support?
Well, look, we don't endorse in primaries, at least up to this point. I will say that our former colleague is an excellent patriot, very conservative, like you and me and your audience.
Paul Dance.
Yes, Senator Graham has shown recently some signs of being conservative. He has the president's endorsement. But I'll just have to say, I don't mean this in a personal way, that Senator Graham exemplifies the Washington swamp. And for us at Heritage, for 50 plus years, as you know, we've tried to break the back of the power of the Washington swamp. So we need a lot of people like Paul Dance running for office.
So with Lindsey Graham, do you think there's ever a time to work with Democrats?
Oh, sure.
Because that's what he's known for.
Particularly when the Democrats want to do something that's conservative. That's a great time to work with them.
Right. So when it comes to foreign policy, do you feel like where do you the rubber hit the road with you and Senator Graham? Like, can you name a couple of policies?
Sure. I think that I know that Senator Graham is much more willing to be engaged in an endless war without a strategy than we are at Heritage. It's not that I think he's unpatriotic. We just have a difference of opinion. The second thing is he has a tendency to cave on spending bills. And, you know, for us at Heritage, in addition to foreign policy, conservative fiscal policy is very important to us. On those two things, there has been a long pattern of not being conservative. And therefore, on our Heritage Action scorecard, Senator Graham scores very low.
He does. We'll see what happens if he gets another 6 years. Sooner or later, all these guys are going to age out, right?
That's part of it.
Around forever.
Actuarial reality will catch up with all of us, right?
There's what we call ultra processed. It's the bars you buy that look like health bars. You turn it over, and it's got 35 ingredients. How do you really describe that group of foods that we know are designed for high shelf life? We know they're loaded with chemicals. And how do we encourage people to eat more wholesome foods and natural foods and things with fiber and complex carbohydrates instead of simple carbohydrates? So that's the task, that's the charge. And so we're going to do our best to try to.
So that is Dr. Marty McCary. He's running things over at HHS along with RFK, and, doing some great work as Dr. Oz, and they're a pretty formidable team. They're trying to change things at the most foundational way. With us right now is Nina Teicholz. She's an investigative science journalist, New York Times bestselling author of The Big Fat Surprise: Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Nina, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
First off, how do you feel as though the whole MAHA movement is doing 6 months in?
Yeah, I think there's just been a tremendous political pole shift, like a magnetic pole shift on food and nutrition, the same way that we've seen in trade unions, corporate greed, where you've seen the right really replace the left. I mean, the left in nutrition and health, the left used to be the party of whole foods, back to nature, real foods. That whole space now has been occupied by the right, and I grew up in Berkeley, California, so no one knows this better than me. This is where this is the epicenter of the whole foods movement. And I've been looking for 20 years when working in this field for the Democratic Party to step up and talk about obesity, the problem of chronic disease in children. I saw the Biden White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health go by without a single panel on children's health. They are backed into a corner now because really the MAHA movement has stitched together folks on the right and the left to really create, people understand that the nation is sicker and fatter and we really need to do a U-turn and make things better.
It's interesting. So it's easy to say, you're overweight because you're not active enough or, and you're eating bad. But then when you think you're eating good and you don't know why you can't lose the weight, and then we find out the food that we were told is good for us isn't, That, I think, is the subtle difference. It's easy to take a lazy person who doesn't want to do anything or is unmotivated and say you got to get yourself in shape. But what if you thought you were eating good, judging by the guidelines you were given?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people think they're eating clean and are unable to drop an ounce. And it's really offensive, I think, to the average American to be told, like, it's your fault. You need to exercise more beyond what you're already doing, and you're also, like, trying to work 2 jobs. And you need to eat better somehow, but you think you're eating well. And the reality is that our dietary guidelines, that food pyramid that we were all sold with the big bottom slab of all grains and starches, and we were told that was the way to eat to be healthy. It turns out none of that is evidence-based. It's not based. It's not. So we were really fed this really misinformation, a lie about what it takes to be healthier and lose weight. And that, I think, will change under this administration finally. I mean,
here's what Dr. Marty Makary said about the food pyramid, cut 44.
You can eat all the bad food you want. You can have, cupcakes and ding dongs or whatever you like. You're free. Yeah, you're welcome.
You're free to do bad things to your body.
You're welcome. You can do it. You can do it. But when we are using taxpayer dollars, we got to make better decisions and not decisions based on the old misinformation of the food pyramid.
So the food pyramid is going to be a thing of the past. When are we going to get a new? When are we going to get new guidelines on everything that we do know about food, which you should be eating, whether you're rich or poor?
Yeah, I hear sometime this fall we will get a new food pyramid, new dietary guidelines, drastically reduced from the 450-page guidelines that are inscrutable to consumers and people don't understand them, and include things like water is a nutrient-dense food. So we think we're going to get down to better science, and these will come out this fall. And I think it'll be the most transformative policy change that this administration makes for restoring health to Americans, right? Because this is what affects school lunches, food in the military, hospital food, downloaded to all.
So once they release these guidelines, then everyone's got to change, right? School lunches and military lunches.
It is required by law that all federal programs follow the dietary guidelines. That is everything. So, and the guidelines are considered the gold standard by all health professionals. So they're downloaded and given to patients. So even if you think, oh, I'm not following the guidelines and I would never go to the government for my health advice, you are getting it through your doctor's office or through your health clinic or wherever. They come to everybody. And all of that will change.
And maybe if the perception is we can trust these guys and they put the time in and they can show it to you, then there won't even be much pushback on what the government is recommending, even though they got burned by the pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be pushback on anything that Kennedy does. But again, let's just get back to the point that, like, what is the opposition, the left, complaining about when they no longer stand for the party of good health and clean food. They had their opportunity to stand up for that. Now, I mean, just this week, there's an article with a Harvard professor quoted defending ultra-processed fake meat, which has the ingredient list of dog food. I mean, that is the corner into which they have been backed based on their ideologies.
Right, that's what I was getting at, is that you only do that if you want to get rid of beef because you believe that cows are destroying the planet.
Right. I mean,
you make up your own meat.
Right. And pretend that is better for health. Then, I mean, again, like the ingredient list of that is, 1,000 ingredients versus beef, one ingredient, beef. Right? Probably the most maligned and healthiest food on the planet. But that ideology that cows are driving global warming has really taken nutrition scientists who are not environmental scientists and taken them completely off the path of nutrition and health. How do I feed myself to be healthy? Instead, we're told you need to feed yourself for what we believe will be healthy for the planet. And if you get obesity and diabetes, well, we're no longer worried about that.
Yeah, the Impossible Burger is impossible to digest. The FDA will attempt to define ultra-processed foods, according to Dr. Marty Makary. In layman's terms, how do I know if my food is processed?
Yeah, I mean, ultra-processed is really ultra-confusing. And this is why Marty Makary is doing such a good thing by trying to bring some clarity to this very murky, ambiguous definition. And let's understand that anytime something is ambiguous, that is open season for corporations or people with political ideologies to come in and manipulate the agenda or define it in the terms that they care about. I think two things for your listeners to really understand what this means, why it's so hard to define ultra-processed foods. Like, One of the definitions is it just has too long a list of ingredients. Well, Triscuits reformulated their product, and now they only have 3 ingredients, like grain, salt, and something else, and they're no longer an ultra-processed food. Do we really think that, box full of starch is good for health? No, I don't. And then another second example. If you make a batch of home-baked chocolate chip cookies, that's not ultra-processed food. Do we really think that's healthy to get all that sugar and white flour and, eat a whole bunch of those? So there are problems with this definition, and I think they're really open to manipulation, and that's why this is such an important effort.
So what did the pyramid have wrong?
Well, let me just give you 3 examples of what's wrong with the pyramid. Still 6 servings of grains a day, including 3 servings of refined grains. 5.5 teaspoons of seed oils, right? That's basically soybean oil in the United States, which oxidize and drive inflammation. And then they still include, they don't have enough protein. They have amount of protein that is defined as the amount that prevent starving children in Africa from not being able to do anything. But we need to probably double the amount of protein that is recommended for optimal health. We should be going for optimal health, not just fight off starvation.
Well, that would be good. So do you think that, what do you say to people who go, well, there's no Whole Foods that are being working class areas, because Whole Foods, if you want to have the fresh food, it's going to cost more. And in your working class areas, you're going to price people out, even though they want to eat well. But if you go to Whole Foods, they're marginally more expensive than traditional supermarkets. Yeah,
I think that relates to this definition of ultra-processed food and why it needs to be cleaned up. Because currently on the ultra-processed food list, a can of baked beans is ultra-processed. Campbell's chicken soup is ultra-processed. So I think there's an equity issue here. If you don't have time to cook, you need to be able to pick up something that we would currently call ultra-processed food and not feel bad about it and not feel like that's unhealthy for your children. That is, we can't be telling people that you need to go home and cook your own homemade chicken soup. I think that's a little elitist of us to be telling people that. So we really need to have a definition of ultra-processed food that includes all Americans, that we all can work with. Not everybody has time to cook from scratch.
So the one thing I hear is the food dyes are coming out. Every day I seem to be listing another major company is going to take the food out, the dyes out. So I was listening to one of these podcasts, a New York Times podcast, and they said, well, yeah, it's good to get the dyes out. But just so you know, sales will drop because people want to see the magenta in Trix or with whatever green thing in these cereals. How do you feel about that?
Am I sad that Fruit Loops is no longer going to have such, robust sales? No, I'm perfectly happy about that. All of those products, do I need electric green ice cream? Do I really need, neon pink fruit roll-ups? No, I don't. None of us do. So
you don't need fruit roll-ups.
I don't eat fruit roll-ups. Dried fruit spikes your sugar more in many cases than a candy bar. You don't need those foods. There's nothing about those foods that are healthy. So if they become bland looking and less appealing and fewer consumers buy them, that is a win for health.
So what can you expect? Finally, what can you expect over the next couple of years? We think we're going to get a new food pyramid. We know the RFK is approaching vaccines, which is a whole different thing. What else? If he's being effective and fulfilling his promise, what else can we expect?
I really hope that they do something around the advice that is given through the medical community so it's helpful for prevention and treatment and reversal of diseases, right? So currently, type 2 diabetes, they're told to eat a high carbohydrate diet and just cover it. I'm using that in quotes, cover it with insulin. That means huge amounts of insulin, and your disease progresses. It still gets worse. Wouldn't it be great to tell people to simply eat a low carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet, which has proven and shown to reverse type 2 diabetes in 10 weeks? You can get this done. That kind of advice, which would actually be evidence-based, really reverse chronic disease in America. That's something that I know the administration is considering, and I think it would really do a lot to make a change.
Yeah, I do think that they also want to do something on vaccines and putting them through the other tests, and we'll see where that goes. The Maha movement is safe. The people on the inside happy with the people on the outside and vice versa?
Yeah, it's complicated, and there's a lot of different factions.
On the outside, and then you got Callie and Casey Means on the inside now working with, and I'm just wondering if once they got inside government, are they seeing they're able to move that iceberg?
Well, you see the amazing amount of change that has happened already. And it's remarkable. again, we haven't been talking about chronic disease epidemics. We haven't been talking about children's health. That's our future generation. It's just been week after week of headlines on this issue, and Kennedy is traveling all over the country and working with states and governors. I mean, I don't know another issue in the administration where, we see such amazing progress.
I know. It's amazing, the transformation taking place. Nina Teicholz, thanks so much for coming in. Pick up a book, The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. Nina, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.